All around the westward isles, in every bay and every inlet, on every beach and sandy bedded narrows between islands, the water teems with billions upon billions of sand eels. These micro shoals live off the all but invisible copepods, delicately engineered organic nanobots, living machines that graze like cows upon the phytoplankton that blooms with the triple blessings of warm water, nutrients from the land, and 20 hours of sunlight. The light-fixing phytoplankton is the reason for the sparkling green-tinged translucency of these waters. This environment is on supercharge through June, July and August. The sand eels are not eels at all, but one of 3 species of tiny, almost boneless fish. They hang around the sandy bits because when it's rough or the currents are strong and predators are around, then they bury themselves in the soft, almost white Hebridean sand, sometimes leaving just their heads sticking out. The sand eels are food for the birds and are most often photographed hanging 10 at a time from the bizarre beak of a smugly concerned puffin. The sand eels are food for the larger fish too, which are eaten by the seals, the porpoises, the dolphins and the whales, and of course us. It would be good if people stopped dredging for shellfish and fishing for sand eels, but they won't. Not in our lifetimes anyway.
I should tell you that sailing in Scotland in the summer is not for those who love their beds too much. The seabirds that feast here are noisy early risers. They have important stuff to do, so they kick off as soon as it starts getting light. By 4 in the morning the sun was fully up, so I raised the hook and let the south-going stream take us in the general direction of Skye. On a day like this, you can guarantee that a breeze will spring up, seemingly out of nowhere, so we drifted through the glory of this summer's day. Sure enough, around 10 in the morning, it arrived, a product of the differential heating effects of the sun on the mountains and the water. The coast here is surprisingly low-lying, a bed of 3 billion-year-old rocks studded with 1 billion-year-old sandstone iselmeres that form a chain of weird pudding-shaped mountains that go all the way down to Skye. We're sailing and drifting past Sutherland, the UK's largest and least populated county. The name derives from Southland, which makes no sense at all unless you're a Norse living in Orkney, because Sutherland was the last toehold of the Norse on the British mainland, so to them it was the Southland. The Norse were pushed out of here by the Mackays, who had in turn been pushed out of their soft Scottish lowland Moray gaff when in around 1160 or so they fell out with King Malcolm III. If the British Isles have an equivalent of the Spartans, then the Mackays fit the bill. Mountain and coastal people. Pictish blood, they say. Every one of the men could climb rocks and cliffs, carry a 40-pound pack 20 miles in a day, take a hand at the oar or the winch, ride a rough horse or fight with claybeg, dirk and shield. They were also early and serious adopters of firearms as soon as they appeared on mainland Britain. Their culture of songs and poetry dealt with love and loss and glorious death at the hands of a respected or long-hated enemy with equal relish. Just being a bloke up here was dangerous enough, what with the cliff climbing, the boats and the neighbours. Selling the services of your sword arm, or even your son's sword arm, for service overseas had always been a money spinner for the Mackays. Their clan symbol, a dirk being thrust ever upwards, is reminiscent of the modern single-finger salute. The motto, Manu Forti, translates as with a strong hand. Always fighting for the clan, raiding and counter-raiding against the hated Rosses, Guns, Sinclairs and most of all, the despised Sutherlands. The Mackays really know how to pack a grudge that ripples on down through the centuries. One of the hero Mackay clan chiefs and his beautiful young son and heir were mercilessly murdered in their beds during a truce while attending peace talks at a Sutherland-controlled castle in Dingwall. This was in 1370. Mackays will talk of this incident as though it happened less than a month ago. The first time the Highlands seriously rose up to invade England was in 1715. On a tidal wave of fervour, the clans gathered while the military-minded Mackays observed the disorganised rabble of Highlanders. They could see that as the horde set off for London, fuelled with passion and hot air, but with no modern weaponry, no ammunition, no baggage train, no cavalry to speak of, and bugger all artillery, were on, as the English like to say, a sticky wicket. So the Mackays sided with the English crown. 30 years later, when bonny Prince Charlie handed out coquettishly baby blue Make Scotland Great Again bonnets to his supporters, conned the clans into having a second papist-backed crack at London, the Mackays could see that they were yet again on a hiding to nothing, and joined the English at Culloden, where the fiery Highlanders were put back within their own borders. It was a cruel twist of fate that it was the Sutherlands who, in the 1820 clearances, finally completed the ethnic cleansing of the Mackays from this wonderful place. The tide turned against us, so we decided to spend the afternoon on a beach that had once belonged to the Gaels, then the Norse, then to the Mackays, and now it's in Sutherland territory. Marvellous things, bilge keelers, ideal for Britain's massive tides. Try this in your fin-keel lozenge and see how it goes, lads.
You can see that the boat is a little bit frondy. Oh, there's fish under there. You like my boat? Yeah, can't you be trained to eat and stuff? So, there is quite a bit of weed on there. The tide is probably as low as it's going to go, so I'm going to scrape this bit.
There was still a knot or two of wrong in the tide, so it was on with the clunker. Seeing this scenery sweep past now, I deeply regret the haste. At the time I was fully expecting that I would return and do a proper job of filming the Minch the following year. So we completely ignored Loch Roe and so many other places. The Mackays held this land for 30 generations. It shaped them. Both the land and the people belonged to the clan. For 750 years, the Mackays had fought and died for this beautiful and unforgiving and completely unique slice of Britain. Then they lost the land, and the clan was scattered. So if you know any men called Mackay and you see them in an occasional black sulk, be nice to them. They might be thinking of their loss because the Sutherlands took away everything they've ever held dear.
Past the island and in. Yes, dead easy.
We turned into Loch Inver and suddenly there were the tall masts of the charter yachts and we realised that we were back in the fringes of Lozenge land. Nothing wrong with that, of course, but a sign of the approaching well-travelled cruising grounds to come. We were about to feel a bit less intrepid, but the sun was still shining and neither of us had seen Loch Inver looking quite so beautiful, so Scottish. Lochs, mountains, modest roads. In the Highlands, they take their war memorials and their military heroes seriously. Along with the quiet of the surroundings, though, Loch Inver is, amazingly, Scotland's third biggest fishing port. 35 million pounds worth of fish flows through this shed every year, but you'd hardly know it. Foreign-owned vessels scrape around every nook and corner of the Minch. gut and palletise the bounty of these beautiful waters while it's still aboard. Load this prime plastic boxed Scottish protein into the capacious, precisely chilled holds of foreign-controlled Pantechnicons which head south. The good stuff is destined for the shining slabs of upmarket Parisian poissonniers. The rest goes to Spanish food factories that churn out supermarket frozen paella by the ton. Sadly, the financial benefits of this trade barely touch the economy of Scotland as the trucks whiz the goodness of the sea southwards and into the ever-gaping maws of our fish-loving southern European neighbours. This is certainly bad for Scottish seas and does almost nothing for the Scottish economy. It's the main reason why the few remaining Scottish fishing skippers voted to leave Europe.
That morning we sailed on southwards, bouncing between calm patches, but always with the tide underneath us. We watched as the wind rippled and flattened the water all around us. We passed Green Island, Island Moor, Polly Bay, Garvey, then watched them come and go through the binocs. There's something exquisitely satisfying about the perfect physics of a small yacht sailing. The way that gentle breeze gets this machine of carefully calibrated curved surfaces moving in almost any direction. It does it in near silence, and the process leaves not a speck of pollution behind. Provided I discount the unguents on her hull and oils in her temporarily silent engine, I can kid myself that I'm more or less at one with my surroundings. Just part of the flow of air and water around this delectable place.
Should we have a look at the chart to see if there are any hazards here? Sorry. Oh, we're just about on the next page, yeah.
Oh, goodness me, you're nearly at the summer house. If you actually go around the outside of the next island, when it comes into view, you'll miss.
Oh yeah, but that's not close to the edge.
People sometimes ask why I sail so close to the edge, but the edge between the sea and the land is where life is at its sharpest. Wildlife thrives on environmental gradients, and along the fringes, where one environment abuts another. I also know just enough geology to understand how these monumental landforms come to be the way they are, and the fact that they're in a continuous state of transition. The knowledge makes them even more of a miracle.
Well, what's going on there then?
I am, as you probably know by now, a salt marsh and mud creek sailor from East Anglia. This array of cliffs, rocks, islands, bays, headlands and lochs are almost overwhelming. In this over-rapid journey south, I'm barely scratching the surface of the joys that lie around the fringes of the Minch. I'm told that the Outer Hebrides are even better. Just around the corner are the Summer Isles. When it comes to terraforming, the person who did them makes Slarty Bartfast seem like a ham-handed bumbling amateur.
This minuscule yet perfectly formed archipelago at the mouth of Loch Broom gets its name from the fact that it was generally only inhabited through the brief summer months. Part of the population from the mainland would decamp to the islands where the fishing was amazing. Birds and eggs could be plucked from the cliffs while the midges and mozzies seldom strayed this far offshore. It tended to be the younger, fitter people who spent their summers here. Harvesting, processing and preserving the natural bounty of the place was hard work and a vital part of feeding the community through the long, dark winter months. The older people tended to stay on the mainland, so the younger ones had the place to themselves. out of sight of the church and the faux disapproval of their elders. Can you imagine anything more wonderful? Generations of Highland love affairs were started and consummated in this idyllic spot, with its many white-sanded beaches and crystal-clear waters. As for my own impatient wife, the hook could barely hit the sand before she was in. She just waited for a moment or two while the local swimmers sussed us out. Then she was off. No stopping her sometimes. We both hated lifting the anchor that day and promised to each other that we would return for a second, third or fourth bite of the Summer Isles. It's hard to imagine a more intriguing and entrancing place.
Tell you everything else about these islands. I neglected to read.
The Isles are dotted across the 12-mile wide mouth of Loch Broom, a magnificent body of water that thrusts 23 miles into the heart of Scotland. We came up the loch and spent the night on a council mooring near Ullapool, yet another off-the-shelf grid-patterned Thomas Telford herring town designed to accommodate clansmen swept off the hills and out of the valleys to make way for the mighty Cheviotdale sheep. An hour from Inverness by road, it is even today far and away the busiest town for miles around, what with being a ferry terminal for the islands and still a half-decent sized fishing port. We rowed ashore for, ironically enough, fish and chips, then back to the boat and turned in. As we left Ullapool the next morning, it was one of those super still Hebridean mornings. It was a real joy to start a day's voyaging when the world is as bright and clear as this. When your only time spent on the water is for your own pleasure, it's easy to forget how important water transport is for Highlanders and Islanders alike. For the past 3 long Scottish days we'd been sailing down the Minch. It is a massive area of generally sheltered water between the Outer Hebrides and the mainland. Sailing vessels have been crisscrossing it for thousands of years. The fish and the birds have sustained hundreds of tiny communities along literally thousands of miles of rock-strewn coastline. The Norse who owned, controlled and exploited it for 300 years called it Skotlandsfjord. It is about 45 miles wide and 70 miles long and was the site of a massive meteorite strike and makes the Solent look like the shallow, crowded ditch it really is. There is so much here to explore and enjoy for a dedicated edge sailor. I apologise if things start to move a bit fast now, but impending crap weather combined with the calendar, the gently draining bank account and the demise of DVD sales meant that we were having to push on a bit to find somewhere safe-ish and cheapish to dump the boat for the expensive summer months to come. I'm coming back to do a decent job of the Minch, I hope. We headed into Gairloch seeking a quiet spot where we could sit out a cold front that was due to sweep through that night. The wind was going to be all over the shop, so we tucked ourselves away on a mooring near the pub at Badachrow.
So, there are 2 bits of pita bread, half a pint of milk which is going off, almost no coffee, no cereal, 1 tomato, no fresh vegetables, onions. Have we got any onions? Potatoes. Rice. Tin tomatoes.
Potatoes, loads of pasta.
Okay.
Loads of tomato sauce. I can make you a very nice pasta dish.
But worst of all,
Sun-dried tomatoes.
no alcohol.
Well, only whiskey and rum.
Yeah, that's no good. This is my wife collecting mussels from the moorings. She collected some last night and thought they were delicious, so she's gone for a row to collect more.
By 11:30 at night, the worst had passed through. Twilight was a mere gap in the gloomy clouds.
Centaur. Should we stay here?
Sorry?
I said, should we stay here today? I'm just thinking about the wind.
Well, it's too windy.
I've no idea.
Yeah.
We haven't had a weather forecast for ages.
The wind's going to be straight at us.
Yeah, I'm afraid it is. If we go out there and it looks horrible, I'm coming back in here and waiting till tomorrow. The rain is probably about to arrive along with wind, which is a pretty bad combination.
Yeah.
We came down Gairloch and turned southeast, heading down the lower Minch, and we found ourselves with a bit of a usable breeze. It was changing around all over the shop in the wake of last night's cold front and under the influence of the mountains. We sailed through a few squalls, windless spots and downpours, but the ever faster tide was funneling us nicely down, heading for the gap in the Kyles.
The weatherman got it completely wrong today. It was supposed to be northwesterly, so we hung around in Gairloch for the rain to go, and then today we were supposed to have a northwesterly behind us and a bit of rain. It's been dramatic around. I mean, the skies have been great, and suddenly we're surrounded with mountains. We started Loch Gairloch, and then we came down here. Torrid just getting a bit interesting, so and it's come. The light's improved. The wind is still a little bit on the nose, so we're going to sail through here, and then to the Kyle of Lochalsh, stay the night, and then the plan is to ride the tide, pretty good tide, down through here, and dump the boat down here. Oh, you're coming to get us, lads, are you? Oh, yeah. You just make a noise for no reason. This bit between Skye and the mainland. We've just been past the Kyle of Lochalsh, and we're coming down here. We come round the corner, very shallow here, 8 metres, and now we're back in the deep, and we're drifting down this bit here. We're going to go down off the edge of the chart. I've downloaded some images from Visit My Harbour of Arisaig, which is about here. So we're just going to drift today until we get bored.
The journey between Skye and the mainland is one of the highlights of any passage along this coast. The mountains come marching right down to the water's edge and funnel the power of the tide through the narrow and fairly shallow, by Scottish standards anyway, gap between the peaks.
This is the last day of our summer journey. It'll be an autumn one, but we're just drifting down. There's no wind at all, really. No, there isn't. And we're just drifting down with 1.5 knots, 1.7 knots. So it is moving reasonably fast, actually. That will be 5.1 knots. 5 knots. How can that be?
Now, I love a good tide. The stronger it is, the faster I go, and they don't come much better than the Kyles between Skye and the mainland. The water in the Minch can either go around the top of Skye or take a shortcut through the Narrows, where the sea has chiselled a gap in the chain of sandstone Islemeres which become the island of Skye. Water will always take a shortcut if it can, so the stuff whizzes backwards and forwards through here at up to 8 or more turbulent knots. Good fun.
How much depth? Eight knots.
When we came out from behind Skye, the wind started to really push the boat along, with the help of 3 knots of tide, of course. Onwards down the coast we came, past Muck and Egg, and finally into Arisaig's tiny loch.
I don't know. I think so. We're just drifting into Arisaig. It's 10 to 7, which I think is about 4 hours before high tide. I'm not entirely sure. Tide is at 12, so 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Ooh, a bit earlier than that. I can see a green post and a red post.
Hello.
The yard boat was waiting for us. They breasted up as we came in, and before I was really emotionally ready, they brought her ashore. And the best summer sail of my life was over. I'm 62 now. I've been to 3 schools, 1 boarding, an ag college and university, sea cadets, rugby, sailing, newsrooms and tough location TV crews. I've lived and worked in a male outdoors world. Over that time, I've got to know 4 men called Mackay, well enough to call them my friends anyway. They were all good sportsmen, physically impressive blokes, always good team players, obeyed the rules, weight carriers, indomitable. 2 had been in army combat divisions, another was a copper. The 4th was a very correct boss of a roofing crew. Good men to have on your side. Brave, up for the challenge. High energy, I would have said. Terrible if they go sour on you though. All 4 could occasionally show a deep streak of mournful melancholy, but it was generally short-lived. A fresh challenge or a good night out with the boys always brought them around. I now have a slightly morbid game I play. When I see a war memorial, I count the Mackays. They've always punched above their weight in military matters, and still do. If you enjoyed the film, please chip in. If you didn't, what the heck did you watch right to the end for?